So I met Ryan at a cocktail party in Jason Borbay's studio, or he goes by the name Borbay. Google it. And we just started chatting about writing. This guy approached me from across the room, and we just started talking about writing. And I certainly know a lot of other writers here in Teton Valley, but Ryan and I don't do the same kind of writing, which is why I kind of like to have him around a little bit, because I write magazine articles. Sometimes I create Wikipedia pages. I write a lot of nonfiction. I don't really dabble in fiction, but Ryan has drafted a couple books. He used to work for the industry, and script reviewer. He's written scripts. He wants to keep writing again. And so it's always good, I think, as a creative, to keep other creatives in your life that aren't doing necessarily the same thing you're doing.
Right.
Like just the fact that he does he practices other genres outside of what I do inspires me, And I dabble in poetry a little, and I'm not sure if he does. But yeah, it's all that stuff that when you're creative, keep creatives around you, connect yourself with others so you can feel that inspiration. Don't trick yourself into thinking this is a competition. I have to compare myself to Ryan.
Right.
What can I learn from Ryan? And I, in my brief time in college, I was told I was incredibly good at writing dialogue. I don't do that, but maybe I should.
Yeah.
And then now we're working on this literary journal together for here in Teton Valley. And the best part about that is we're not contributing, we're editors, and we get to see all this wonderful submissions coming in, encouraging others to please submit your writing. You don't have to be a writer, just submit your writing.
Right.
And that is also so gratifying, to encourage others to tap into their creativity and just take a chance on yourself.
I agree. And explore your curiosity. That's clearly what Ryan has done. And he's found himself in this with this huge, huge body of work that's varied and extensive. Yeah.
He really does have a big body of work. And one of my favorite things too about Ryan is he freely admits that nature is one of his biggest inspirations. If he were not outside moving around, he would not be able to create the way he does. And so I think also keeping nature in your periphery is important to your spirit, and maybe it would help you channel that inspiration in a way that you didn't expect.
We hope you enjoy this episode.
Yeah, this is a fun one, guys. Ryan Ariano.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going all right. How are you doing?
Just making it through one of the longest winters I can remember.
I think we started the last podcast with weather. You can't ignore it right now. It's just crazy. And Ryan and I were actually just talking about how it's been so cold, and next week it's supposed to get towards 60. And in this place, that just means flooding. I think we're going to be grateful for the warmth and terrified of the results.
So I tell you what, when it's 60 degrees and sunny, I'm going to be busting out the bathing suit. I'm going to be like sitting on the
I'll do that in Florida in this place.
I mean, yeah, right now I'll take what we can get.
Yeah, as soon as it's 45, I'm out there. Let's talk about how we met.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ryan and I did not know each other until I moved back to Teton Valley, which I'd made this place my home for about a decade, and then came back. And I was invited to a holiday cocktail hour at an artist studio.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Ryan and I first met. And then we went to another event at the same studio.
We went to the Art Council thing.
Yes.
The Fall Arts Fest.
That's right. Teton Valley is going to be having its first Fall Arts Festival.
At least in modern history. They said they did it before or whatever, but that's like...
I think it was in the 90s, which is like ancient history.
I mean, it's BC, before COVID, So
Exactly. And then Ryan approached me after that meeting and asked if I wanted to put together a literary journal with him in celebration of this event. So Ryan and I are actually working on another project together. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's I feel like the visual artists, I mean, they're amazing and don't, and I can't do what they do for sure.
Right.
But I think there's something pretty cool to see what people can do with just a couple sketches on a piece of paper that turn into letters, that turn into sentences, that turn into paragraphs, that turn into stories. And I think
words are art.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that there should be a celebration of that as well. And there are plenty of inspired writers in this valley as well. So
absolutely. And Teton Valley and Jackson Hole is very heavy in visual arts because of the location itself. Ryan and I live in a place that if you want to find out what the word majesty is as it's related to nature, just come for a visit.
I mean, I love the old, was it Teddy Roosevelt quote where first time he saw Grand Teton Park, he was like, now that's what mountains are supposed to look like.
And he was right.
Old bull moose.
That's right. And that kind of segues into the fact that you are not just a writer, but you love to play outside.
Yeah.
You can't help yourself.
No, I can't. Actually, I can right now because I broke my ankle. And so it's been one of the most frustrating exercises in forced patience I've ever had to go through. But, it's good. It's good, the kind of summoning the chi and whatnot.
Do you think the universe was speaking to you?
I think the universe was definitely telling me I needed to slow down and to stop trying to show kids how to spin in the park.
And speaking of that, Ryan and I kind of caught up prior to this conversation and discussed his own experiences as a child at play. And let's talk about that a little bit. Let's go back to kind of your youth and how outdoor play inspired you and kind of how that plays into your adulthood right now.
Yeah. I played lacrosse and soccer, started, I think, when I was, 5. Played sports year round all the time. And so, but I was always pretty geeky too. So it was this fun combination of like uber jock and like huge nerd, so I collected Star Wars toys, but then would, be spending a couple hours in the weight room, and so it was always this dichotomy, but the one definitely fed the other. And to the point where when I went off to college, it was really just so I could go somewhere where I could go surfing and play. And I played lacrosse there too.
And where did you attend college?
University of San Diego.
Nice.
And just went out there. Didn't really think much about the degree. I just wanted an excuse to move to San Diego.
To catch some waves in La Jolla.
To catch some waves. And then also there were some great days where you could go surfing in the morning and then go snowboarding in the afternoon. And then, that night skateboard to a party. So it was always kind of that and that whole. And so also that was kind of my first real, growing up in Baltimore, I think a lot of my inspiration there were things like Edgar Allan Poe and growing up in private schools, I was reading A Separate Peace and reading kind of the, sort of the standard private school writer, people. And then, as I got bigger and more into the subversive counterculture, skate, surf, snow scene, then that was when my mind just got opened up to, Hunter S. Thompson, and pretty much my life's been downhill ever since.
And we also have a shared love of Kerouac.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. I mean, because from Hunter S. Thompson, then you got to go to the postmodernists, and you got Kerouac, and then from there you got to jump to Henry Miller, and then you start going to like Rimbaud and Newt Hampson and all these horribly brilliant, insane, manic depressive geniuses.
You're going to tap into the lonely and the longing to get the words out sometimes.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about like your craving for activity and just kind of how you were built intrinsically to always be active, when did the writing kind of start coming into play where you knew these two things need to work together? You never like stopped being active so you could write, or I don't know, you're making time for both because one feeds the other, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was funny when I graduated from high school, we had to do a senior project, which was supposed to be what you're going to do for, what you theoretically are going to do when you grow up. And so I proposed the idea of writing a novella, which was I had to go jump through all these hoops because, I went to a high school that was like, oh, you're going to go into finance or real estate. Like we're a Baltimore, we're a preparatory private school. And so I started doing that, but it wasn't necessarily, a choice. Like writing has never been a choice. If I could like just give up writing, I'm not going to lie. Like there's a big part of me that's like, oh man, it'd be so nice if I didn't have to write every day. If I wasn't, kept up late at night with like, oh, these ideas and all. Like I was telling you earlier, I really wish I could be that person who worked the 9-to-5 job and then skied on the weekends and was totally happy, working 9 to 6, come home, eat some dinner, get to bed by like 9 o'clock, get well rested, like a 9-10 hours of sleep every night, wake up in the morning.
And so tell us what you did just the other night that goes against all of this.
Yeah. I mean, just the other night, and again, to preface it, I, at this moment, because of a recent house fire, currently, living with my parents, which have not done well, that's very Kerouacian though, isn't it? I mean, when he wasn't on the road, he was living with his mom. So
that's another podcast, Ryan. Kerouac's relationship with his mother is an endless
fraud.
Endlessly fraught.
But anyway, so I'm at my parents' house and I'm writing, and as is normal for me, it's 2 a.m. and I have on private TV in the background and whatever, and I'm just really grooving and getting my thing going. And my mom pops out of her bedroom and is like, "Can you turn that down, please?" And I'm just there like, oh man, I wish I could be a normal person who, just
doesn't need to do it this
late or this way. And another night, my girlfriend who, again, a lot of us moved into this house.
Close quarters.
So I moved down to the basement thinking, okay, no one can hear me down there. Part of the writing process is there are just sometimes where the words don't come. And if you try to force them out, they're not going to. So you got to find something to do. And so for me, it'll be like hitting a punching bag or playing guitar. Guitar is definitely a big thing that's been for me. And so I would stop for a little bit. And because again, even if you start writing at 9, especially the way I find it, you might write a couple paragraphs at most between 9 and midnight sometimes. Sometimes I write like a couple sentences. Then all of a sudden at like 12:30, 1 o'clock, that inspiration strikes, but it's like chipping away at a stone. Like each little hit, you get a little bit. And then all of a sudden you hit a seam and a whole chunk rips out.
Right.
But you got to have the patience to do that.
Right. And you have to trust your tools.
And you have to trust your tools and trust your own skill and be like, you know what, it's gonna happen.
Right.
But then the next day I find out from my girlfriend, because I had been playing the guitar and been loud. And she's like, the basement's not soundproof. And I realized, I kept her up till 3:30 in the morning when she had to wake up the next day and take the kid to school.
Right. Yeah. I think too, like when you're in partnership and you're still trying to feed your creativity, it takes a special person to be partnered with, to understand what that requires.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so when you pitched your novella, and I want to ask you, what was the first time you were ever published? I'm getting the feeling that it was when you were in adolescence, maybe.
Funny thing, the first time I was ever published, in 7th grade, Scholastic had a competition you had to write an essay about a gym. And I came up with this idea, which is really funny now. This is rather prescient, but I was like, an idea where it's a gym where basically a guy goes in and is pitching an idea to an owner of a chain of gyms about bikes, like exercise bikes that have screens that can do something like as if you're virtually riding up and down mountains and whatever, or like treadmills where you can look like you're running on trails. So that was my story. And I ended up winning this competition from Scholastic and won $1,000, which when I was in 7th grade,
I can retire now.
I'm like, this is awesome. I'm going to buy that life-size Yoda statue that I wanted to buy. my parents intervened there, but I mean, maybe not. I mean, that thing was pretty sick.
And do you feel like as a kid, wow, that's pretty early on to feel totally validated, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing, Ryan.
It was pretty cool.
And then did that make you want to just do more competitions and how much more can I achieve?
It did, but then on the other side became, I made one mistake, which I was talking about earlier, in that if you're a writer, you can't ever listen to anybody else. Because then after that, I definitely had people being like, oh, it's a fluke. It's just a whatever. That's not really a career path, a career choice. So as I say, I tried really hard to do the corporate path.
Right.
I just, unfortunately, like anytime I had a job, it was like I couldn't just do that.
It didn't sit well.
Like I tried really hard to all right, I'm just going to work and focus on this job. And then it's like, well, actually, I'm, I wish I could take my lunch break and just eat, but normally I'm sitting in my car writing.
Right.
Or I wish, as I said, I could get to sleep early, but even if I, was working that 9 to 6, then I'm normally picking up writing gigs at night. So, writing from 8 to 3 and then working 9 to 6. Which isn't necessarily the best for one's sleep habits or sanity, but right. I'd go much crazier if I didn't.
Yeah, sure. You just had to keep doing it. And you couldn't help yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, the theme of the podcast is the creative adult is the child who survived. And we do like to focus on creative professionals that are making a living, channeling their creativity. And I do understand that one of your 9 to 6, 8 to 5 was the Hollywood machine.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, again, it was around the time where I was really starting to discover the depth of my horrible writing problem. But then I was still trying to stay somewhat devoted to this idea of like corporate. So I'm like, all right, Hollywood is where creativity meets commerce, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had been working in the surf industry and then in marketing in like retail, and then jumped over to Hollywood because I'm like, that's where I want to head, and started off in marketing because I figured that was, based on my resume, the easiest way for me to get in. Right, but then I quickly jumped over to TV lit, where, I was briefly on the representation side before I managed to kind of finagle my way into reading scripts and books and stuff like that came in full time. So that was, as far as corporate gigs go, that was great because I would get a script and then go to the Beverly Hills library across the street and sit there, read a script while I'm drinking my coffee and, scone or whatever, and write some script coverage or read a book or whatever. And, I got to essentially, I got paid to read scripts and books all the time, which then led to me being able to better refine my own scripts and books and things like that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you if all that input from other writers helped you develop your mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, number one, I learned about, and I haven't written a screenplay in a little bit just because, out here definitely feels a little different. That's something I should pick back up, but I kind of learned the craftsmanship, like the difference between, for example, a screenplay where you got 120 pages no matter what, maybe 90, but 90 to 120 pages. And you got to hit this point by this page and this point by this page.
Story,
so you learned there's a lot more strict craftsmanship there, which is both exhilarating and confining and kind of, but yeah, so I got to experience a lot of that, and it was a really cool corporate gig. But again, the funny thing was, while, in between that, my life was so disciplined where every Saturday I would wake up early, write for about 5 or 6 hours straight, and then carry on with my life, go surfing, go out and play, hike in the hills, do whatever I could.
Go out and be a kid.
Go out and be a kid. Exactly. I mean, that's the best thing to do after you've finished, being like, I'm gonna, be an artist, and which is such a childish dream. Anyway.
Agree.
You're like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go run through the hills and play in the woods. And, again, I mean, like surfing and snowboarding, both of those are things that we find these excuses of like, it's doing a thing, but really it's just coming up with an excuse to play in the woods. Cause when you get older, like you can't just say like, I'm going to go play in the woods. I mean, now it's becoming more accepted, but it didn't used to be.
Sure.
But you could be like, I'm going to go skiing today, or I'm going to go hiking, or I'm going to go climbing. And it's like, oh, that's something real that grownups do.
But don't call it play.
I'm not just going to run around the woods aimlessly and build forts. No, I'm going to go hiking in the woods. And if I happen to stack a few branches against this tree,
man, I would love to go build a fort. I was just thinking about a blanket fort the other day.
Oh my God.
I'm going to do that after you leave today.
That's a great idea. Little blanket fort, and then you can like I think set up like a whole writing blanket fort thing. That it would be very much. I mean, you could pretend like it's Hemingway in Africa. Like set up your little glamping tent right there.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I like it. You can hang it like a picture of a lion just outside. It'd be really cool.
Bye. You're an inspiration. So yeah, let's go back to kind of, I do want to talk a little bit about the entertainment industry and what your influences are, because you do develop your own scripts. You have, and I think that's not going to end for you. Maybe you're taking a break, but who's your favorite writer, director?
I mean, that's a tough one.
Right. There's so many.
Because, I hate to say it because I feel like this is the, stereotypical dude answer, but for sure Quentin Tarantino. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I hate to say it because I know, but
like we just met and I knew.
But you know what? He steals from all of my favorites too. Like I love Akira Kurosawa, and then I love watching all the westerns that were stolen from him.
Right. Well, so much of his work is an ode.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
so many movements in film.
But the way that he speaks that language, and again, I mean, lifetime geek over here.
Right.
So,
and I'm coming from more of an angle of Cameron Crowe.
I mean, I love Cameron Crowe, though. Again, I love most of his works. There are some like Almost Famous that I could watch every day for the rest of my life.
One of my favorites,
and it's going to be awesome.
Love Singles. That thing is on repeat in my brain, plus the soundtrack, right?
Well, speaking kind of to that, one of my other favorites is Linklater. Yes. Linklater. And
Dazed and Confused.
Dazed and Confused, up to Boyhood, to the,
yes.
After Sunset, after like that trilogy. What was it? Before Sunrise, After Sunset. After Sunrise.
Yeah, one of those
Julie
two.
Delpy and Ethan Hawke. I mean, I think that he's someone else who I really like, and I feel like he's in that Cameron Crowe vein.
Yeah. PTA.
Paul Thomas Anderson. Yes. I actually last year wrote an article.
Lucky.
About the unofficial history of Boogie Nights, and it was just so fun.
I am sure.
Like, I mean, he originally wrote that and created a version of Boogie Nights when he was a kid. You can find it online. And he came up with Dirk Diggler, like back then. Like you can find it. And it's like one of his buddies is a bodybuilder who was in it. And it was like this super low budget, like student film that he made in high school.
Wow.
About Dirk Diggler. And
that guy is quirky as hell. I just love it.
It's
Magnolia. Right.
I mean,
powerful.
There Will Be Blood, I feel like is one of my,
right.
all-time
I haven't
favorites.
seen that once.
You gotta see that. I mean, it's America right there.
True.
I do little every now and then I'll do like kind of mini movie fests to introduce my son to various films and genres. And so I'm like really excited. He's 9 now, so he's a little young, but I'm really excited for when we do like our Quentin Tarantino and our Paul Thomas Anderson and those. I mean, I think I'm not gonna go there yet. He's seen some R movies, but I think those take it to another level,
extreme level, for sure.
But I mean, I was thinking also I'd do like a Daniel Day-Lewis history of America. You start with Last of the Mohicans, and then you go to Gangs in New York. So then you're jumping into Scorsese, and then, you go to There Will Be Blood. And
God, his choice of material is just fantastic, isn't it?
I mean, how many Oscars? I think he's won 2, right? I think he's won 2 Oscars.
At least.
He's won 2 Oscars,
My
and then
left
he'll
foot.
retire, and then he'll come back and do another Oscar.
Yeah, he'll say I'm done, and then he's just like, I'm just recharging, getting ready for the next award.
I mean, he's still behind Meryl Streep, but aren't we all?
Yes. None of us will ever catch up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I actually want to one of my favorite interviews is Mark Maron, and one of his podcasts is not recent, but there was something he said one time about, if they call my writing content one more time, I'm going to punch somebody in the face. That is not a direct quote, it's a summary. But it is, I think, the struggle of the writer to be in a world where writing is content.
Yeah.
But Ryan and I both write content. Ryan and I both write marketing copy. Ryan does a lot of gear reviews. And I, for instance, work for a magazine that's almost fully advertorial. And so we're both kind of participating in whatever we can do to earn a living from our writing, even if it is that. So it's not like, Ryan's not sitting here saying, well, I want to write a book or a screenplay, and I'm not going to sacrifice my integrity. I will never write a newsletter. Wrong.
I'm not going to lie, though. I do respect those people who do that.
Yes.
Now, I know that I've known quite a few of them, and most of the ones I know who had that artistic integrity did not necessarily have to worry too much about paying the bills immediately. And hey, no judgment there. It's like, Madame Bovary, Gustave Flaubert had enough money that after he wrote his first book about St. Anthony, I think, and it was a complete flop, he could just travel around Europe with his family wealth, and then eventually came back and wrote Madame Bovary.
Right.
That doesn't take anything away from how brilliant of a novel that is.
Those are just fortunate life circumstances that can.
Yeah, I don't think, and also there are people like Poe who managed to eke it out with nothing but a gambling addiction and horrible romantic and substance choices.
Right.
But yeah, I think that for a working writer, and especially, if you kind of have to make certain choices, like there was a time when I, was dating a girl and I lived in LA, and if it had been just me, I'm like, I could have eked out an existence living in a warehouse, like a cold water flat somewhere, and just done whatever and writing. But I really care about this person, and I don't necessarily want her to suffer for my ambition and dreams. Now I've got a kid.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing and a wonderful thing. But on the other hand, too, Beatles started off playing like, what was it? Something like they played in like a super show where they played like 20 shows a day or something crazy. And Sinatra started off as a singing waiter. Like all these great people started off in these jobs where it was just doing it and repetition. And yeah, I'm sure we're not going to be running out to buy the Sinatra sings Paul Anka at the Spider Lounge vinyl any day soon. But I'm sure he learned a lot from that. Right.
I mean, I love the stories when artists come from something small, and certainly those circumstances could have easily made them give up, but they kept going. And I do want to talk about your relationship with your son. He's a writer.
He is a writer.
And he's 9.
Yeah, it's, it's really cool. For a few years now, we've been going on adventures together.
Iceland?
Well, just recently, last summer we went to Iceland and England, and we went in July and hiked a glacier, went skiing there, and went to a ice cave. And again, because it was just him and I, but this is actually an article that is, I think, coming out this week, I was told. he also was my photographer.
And who did you write that for?
That's from Mountain Weekly News.
Gotcha.
And so he also was a photographer. So, he's been photographing me in various adventures probably since he was 7 or 6. So like,
so good.
It's pretty cool to first get a published picture when you're 6 or 7 or whatever. And same thing, like this Iceland, any picture of me, like he took, and it's going to be some really cool stuff. But then also, along the lines of he's seen the gear and the gear reviews and he's testing things out. And one thing that he really liked was I tested out an electric skateboard and he's like, I want to try one too. So I reached out to my editor and I'm like, what do you think? You think like
that's perspective, cool? Right? Yeah.
And he's like, he sent it out. And last year I had done something with my son where I had him test something out and I had him kind of talk it through with me. But this year I'm like, all right, if you want, you want this electric skateboard, you're gonna have to write for it. And so, yeah, he wrote this review and it was, it took him a bit and I had to kind of walk him through the technique and how it's like, well, describe this aspect of it, describe this and show what's your experience on it. How did it make you feel and all this? But then, at 9 years old, he got his first published article.
Pretty amazing.
So that was pretty cool. Now he's excited though. He's definitely like, wow, that was so tough. And I'm like, yeah, why do you do it every day? It was like, I think it's Howard Kazanjian who said being a writer is like having homework every night for the rest of your life.
Right? Dorothy Parker said, what did she say? I hate writing, but I love having written. So the process was torture, but I love it when it's done, kind of in a way. I don't know if I got that right. Actually, Ryan and I were talking about a quote from Hemingway that we both knew. And it is the first draft of anything is shit. And maybe, right? Maybe.
There are some times when, if maybe the article is more informational than inspirational.
Oh, that's so
good. Then if you're good enough at your craft, you can craft something well made enough to get the information across without it being bland.
Right.
So in that case, maybe a first draft could be okay, but certainly as you get into...
Do you think it speaks to your level of passion? I think it does for me.
I think it speaks to level of passion.
Yeah, if I'm writing about art, that's where it's at for me.
Yeah.
And when I'm doing that, I'm usually writing a long format magazine article and I want it to be the cleanest copy because I want to honor the artist. But if I'm writing a newsletter or a 300-word, really slim inset thing, right?
Yeah.
You're getting paid for it, but is it elevated?
Well, and even more, in some of those, you start off with, along the line of Hemingway, you really want to have your prose as stripped down anyway.
Yep.
Where you're literally just stating basic facts. You can get playful with it a little bit, but that's sort of more structured play, right? It's more like, it's more like maybe, one of those little ball on the hoop thing, which there's a ball, there's a string, there's a hoop, you got to throw it up and catch it.
Yeah.
And it's pretty simple versus here's the playground. There's so many directions you can go. Where are you going to go? Right. And is it going to be the smoothest thing? Or again, like snowboarding. Okay, here's a big open face. What's going to be your line?
Hone your focus.
It's going to hone your focus and you're going to be like, I'm really going to, like every time you're standing, especially riding backcountry and you're standing at the top of a ridge, if you look down at an open blank face, you look at that and you're like, what can I create out of this open canvas? How can I make this the best experience I can have, especially if you've spent like 6 or 7 hours trying to get up there.
Right.
Then you're like, oh, I want to go over there and poke through those trees and maybe drop off those cliffs. And then here, I'm going to kind of just let it free. And then when you're in that zone, you're like, I'm going to lay out the biggest slash, but try to keep it in like a beautiful, just curving little S. And then now I'm going to go over here and see what's over there.
Right. I think even if you want to involve yourself in excess, you still have to have a reason, right?
You know,
one of my favorite editors, shout out to Rachel, taught me how to kill my darlings. And it's like, you don't need an adjective here. This is the totally wrong word. And it also has a lot to do with like the rhythm of dialect. Even when you're not writing dialogue, you still want the paragraph to flow in a way where it's not choppy. And that has a lot to do with syllable structure, hard consonants versus soft. You know, I think that people that don't write I mean, it's not their fault because they're not writers, but they don't necessarily get that there is a flow. It's personal to your voice, but it's also necessary for it to be a good read.
And they jump in there. A lot of them I've noticed will like love sprinkling through superlatives and buzzwords. And again, it becomes a little difficult for me because in some of the snowboard stuff, I got to be like, yeah, man, this is super epic, you know, something like that.
No one's ever said that about snowboarding ever.
Yeah, it's about knowing, but then it's also being able to kind of pull that back and be like, you know, when the sun is rising over the blood meridian and when you're standing at the top of that peak, you want to make sure that you have something you can depend on.
And you also have to trust the reader. Iceberg theory, right? Yeah.
But then, you know, again, with this, it's like you kind of have to draw that fine line between like who are the spiritual existential bros and who are like the meathead bros. And luckily I've felt into both categories at one point or another.
You know, it's always good to see both sides of the coin, Ryan.
But, you know, as far as the kill your darlings thing, that reminded me of
that's tough.
Mark Twain. One of my favorite Mark Twain novels is Pudd'nhead Wilson.
I've never read that.
I was really
certainly have heard of it.
Yeah, it's and in one of his foreword or afterword, some description of writing it, he talks about how he's like, yeah, I started writing it, and then all of a sudden I realized I had this character and that character, and I'm paraphrasing. And he's like, and I didn't know what to do with this widow, so I drowned her. And I didn't know what to do with this person, so I drowned him too. And then he starts listing like all these ancillary characters who he liked, but he was like, I don't know what to do with them, and they're too much, and it's making too much. And so he's joking. He's like, yep, so I drowned him. Yep, so I drowned that person and got rid of them, you know, and all this. And it was just such a perfect way to put it, because there's so often where, you know, you have a sentence you really like, but you're like, this is like the best part of this whole thing. But it's sort of like individual player versus the whole team, right? You know, it's like,
how does that character or situation feed into the subplots that you're nurturing? Does it make sense for that person to even exist?
You know, it's like Shakespeare had to kill Mercutio because he was way more interesting than Romeo.
You got that right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Romeo and Juliet. Two dysfunctional 14-year-olds who are also suicidal. That story, I don't consider it a romance, even though the verbiage is just so touching, and the way, of course, Shakespeare, right? And the way he states anything. But I am a fan of more of his comedies, and his lightness, As You Like It, might be my favorite.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Midsummer Night's Dream.
I love that one too. But
I like, you know, fairies and people running off and all sorts of mishaps.
What, any other playwrights?
You know, I mean, I've got to say that I have David Mamet.
Yeah.
I really like David Mamet. I like how a lot of his dialogue is almost like a bullet shot right through the chest, which again is following in that Hemingway tradition.
Those
right?
masters of dialogue. Arthur Miller.
I was just about to say Arthur Miller. I actually just watched that Marilyn Monroe Blonde movie, and
Is that interesting? That's a very complicated story. She is.
Oh yeah.
But his love for her was also very complicated. I
didn't realize her last movie was one of his misfits.
Yeah. I think he wrote it for her. I mean, wrote the role for her.
Yeah.
I had the great fortune of seeing Death of a Salesman with Brian Dennehy.
Oh, wow.
I know. And it's one of my most cherished experiences as an audience member.
As Willie Loman?
Yes.
That's
in St.
awesome.
Louis. I think the Broadway cast was on tour. But yeah, that is one of the things that my father nurtured in my sister and I. We stage productions, you know. I know all the words to every song in Fiddler on the Roof.
I like that.
And other things. I mean, he took us to see a chorus line. He really wanted us to be kind of immersed in not just the stage play itself, but the entire experience, like being in the audience, understanding the music matters. It's all storytelling. Embrace every bit of it, you know?
I mean, again, I like Rodgers and Hammerstein and Gilbert and Sullivan.
So fun.
I actually have I had the Modern Major General song memorized because it was such a fun song, and I was like, this is great. And I almost went out for the play last spring. Actually, I was singing it one night at Jason's, and he sent my Jason Borbez, and he sent my audition over.
He filmed it?
Yeah, he filmed it. And then, of course, him being him, he then texted it over to the director. And she's like, do you want the part? It's yours. And I'm like, I'm coaching lacrosse. I'm blending families. I've got all this stuff, you know, working a ton. And it was one of the few things where I had to, like, you know, do the hard thing of saying no, because I could throw this in there and I would half-ass it, and I would rather whole-ass one thing than half-ass two things.
Yes, thank you, Ron Swanson.
5 things.
Yeah. And so were you in drama in high school along with the lacrosse?
So it was funny. I did a couple, but again, became this complicated thing of, like, you know, I was on the jock side of things. And it was almost like the artist thing was, again, along the lines of, like, if I could have quit it, I would have. But then, yes, I was in a African dance production, one of 2 white kids in it, because I was Baltimore, you know, which was really cool. And then I was in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying.
Oh, get out of here. That's hilarious.
Yeah. No, I wasn't like a lead role in either of them. But, you know, I was in both of those on top of, you know, playing soccer and wrestling and lacrosse. And
I went out for one play as a senior in high school. It was Mousetrap by Agatha Christie.
Oh, yeah?
And I got the lead.
Really?
I got Molly.
That's awesome.
And I threw up before every single performance because I have terrible stage fright, but I did it. And I wasn't really in drama club. Like, I think when I think about that kind of thing, well, first of all, when I was in 5th grade, we also had, well, it was 5th grade, so it was younger than what you did, but we had to write down what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I wrote, I want to be an actress or a writer. And she said, don't get your hopes up.
Brutal, but
I'm a writer. And one time I was an actress.
And I would say both of those careers are the kinds where if anyone can talk you out of it, then you shouldn't do it.
Ah, that's such good advice.
Because honestly, they both are like,
you want it enough.
They both are juice is worth the squeeze. I mean, I would not wish the life of a writer on anybody. Like, on my worst enemy. It's, as I said, like, it's not necessarily something that you choose. It's kind of like, if I don't write, and I think, and Hemingway even talks about it. He's like, if I don't write every day, I feel like shit.
Right.
You know? And so along those lines, if anybody can convince you not to do it,
maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
You shouldn't be doing it.
And, you know, part of our kind of goal, Matt and I, with this podcast is to talk to people, to encourage the audience to channel their creativity no matter what they're doing for a living. To say, to look at their original blueprint. What was I like as a kid? What did I love? Can any of that make me happy now? Can I go back and mine for myself those important jewels that made me original playful, happy, creative. And what would you say to the average person that doesn't necessarily have a lot of creativity in their life? I think that just having it matters.
I think just play. I think part of it is, to a certain extent, you eventually have to learn not to care.
Right.
Just learn, like, the whole, and again, a little cheesy, whatever, dance like nobody's watching thing. But there is a lot of validity to, like, you know what, when you come home, if you want to be an eccentric artist and paint like 10 million pictures of, Barbara Streisand, I'm taking that from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But, and that's your thing, then, go off and do it. Like, good for you. There's, do you watch Ted Lasso?
Yes.
I loved when Higgins was no longer there and she goes to his house and he's like, dressed like a rock and roller playing stand-up bass. And it's like, wait, what? What here doesn't fit? I love that. I love the idea of people being like, I just want to get weird with it.
Yeah, this is part of my true self and I am not afraid.
My dad was like a very buttoned down banker his whole life. And now he retired and he's got like long hair and jade earrings and like, and my mom is doing art and stuff. And my dad's become like a landscaper and, is
good for him
and a woodworker and all this stuff. And it's like, hey, I think too often people feel like, oh, I'm not really creative. And I guess that's technically true, that you're not creative if that's what you're telling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But all it takes is to tell yourself, yeah, I could create something cool, even if it's just like a horribly made replica of something you saw online.
Right.
Like you see one of those crafts things and you're like, oh, I'm trying to do that. Yeah. It doesn't look like it. It's okay.
You're right.
It's still fun.
And too, like you told me your dad's a landscaper. I think gardening is creative.
Totally.
Well, what could be more creative?
Again, he's not like a professional landscaper. He's just been going around like, I want to do this. Yeah. We built like a stone wall last year where he just had all these stones that he'd collected over his life. And it was like kind of a really unnecessary wall. It's, it's like just right there.
It's probably aesthetically pleasing.
Very aesthetically pleasing. And it was totally a work of artistic craftsmanship.
Really nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. What do you think, Matt? I don't know if he can talk to us right now.
Yes, I have to unmute and bring video up. Well, this is great, Ryan. I do have a question, though. It's a very serious question. It's one that I ask all of my friends, my best friends, and we go around and round and round on it. What do you think? Well, it's partially two questions. What is your favorite, and what do you think is the best Tarantino film?
Oh, this is a tough one.
Because this hard.
Is going to take an hour.
Let's go.
Okay. So my favorite, and I would say that my favorite, as far as enjoyment, as far as loving the dynamics of it, is Kill Bill, which was originally meant as one movie. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about it is that, number one, he loves all these different genres. He found a way to combine every genre and have everyone represented by a different character in a different scenario. It's such a streamlined plot point. Woman gets revenge on the people who killed her. Yet here's the blaxploitation movie. Here is the Western movie. Here is the Kung Fu movie. Mm-hmm. Here's like everything that has inspired him, mm-hmm. all in one movie. And then he brings in all these other little storytelling elements, which it's like, why do we need a little kind of anime sequence in the middle? And that shouldn't work.
Right.
But it does, mm-hmm. even though it's the only time that happens in the movie. I think, so that's my favorite. As far as best, that is really tough, because there's one side of me that, looking at impact, has to say it's going to be Pulp Fiction. Mm. because that pretty much changed how people viewed movies, did movies. Plus, he did that with such a low budget. I mean, coming off of Reservoir Dogs, but it reinvigorated John Travolta, whose career was completely dead. It brought nonlinear storytelling into the mainstream.
That part I love.
Mm-hmm.
Love.
Like, I had a friend of mine who told me he once went on a date with a girl, and they're talking about movies because he was a film school kid and she was too. And she's like, yeah, I like Pulp Fiction, but I don't understand, after he got killed, how was John Travolta still alive at the end? And he was like, all right, this date's over. I'm sorry. Like,
That's amazing.
So I would say that I would argue that's his best.
Yeah. It kicked off. It was the nuclear explosion to create the independent film, genre basically of the 90s, with Miramax, and everybody was started creating their own little tiny studios to do the same thing. And it was almost, you'd say Kill Bill was like Pulp Fiction times a million, because Pulp Fiction was just individual stories being told at different times.
Yep.
And Kill Bill was times a million, So I love that choice. Jen, you're going to have to go too.
My favorite is Reservoir Dogs.
Mm.
I think just because in that time frame, we were talking about the 90s, like when Tarantino was employed by a video store.
Yeah.
He, like Ryan said, if someone's going to talk you out of it, don't do it.
Mm.
What an amazing story of someone who germinated their own talent and said, I'm doing this, don't talk me out of it. And I think currently, like in the more recent Hateful Eight, baby, I love that movie.
You like the dialogue driven Tarantino.
I do.
That's it right there. Those are his two most dialogue rich.
Yeah.
Like literally they're both self-contained dialogue movies.
Right. And I also have a terrible girl crush on Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Wow.
Nothing terrible about that.
Yeah. That was the best casting he's done in a
amazing casting in that film. And you're right. I think across the board, probably why Cameron Crowe is my favorite writer director. It's the dialogue driven.
I mean, because those are both essentially self-contained dialogue movies.
But I love Reservoir Dogs. I still love to watch Michael Madsen dance around and cut someone's ear off.
The Steelers wheel.
Why?
Stuck in the middle.
And that song was about 2/3 of the budget, to be able to use that.
To pay for the rights to this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I think he did that in Sundance Lab. And then the year later was Paul Thomas Anderson did, I want to say, Hard Eight in Sundance Lab. And then Tarantino's, Reservoir Dogs, and led him Pulp Fiction. Again, I'm percentage sure. I'm not going to say I'm 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure. But then I know that was where PTA then off of Hard Eight did Boogie Nights.
Amazing.
And so both of them kind of came out of nowhere and went into this. I mean, it's really cool that we have institutions like that. But there's something to be said for those early ones. Hard Eight is another, like Paul Thomas Anderson's Hard Eight.
I didn't see that either. I'm going to write that down.
Early, brilliant work that then reflects later through his stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you look at that 90s, and Tarantino set it off, but the 90s, you had all these brilliant indie auteurs.
The indie movement of the 90s was just so inspirational. I still lean on, oh my God, Parker Posey.
Right.
As like the indie girl. I mean, what a crack up, and just so original. And she's still very original in the way she performs,
Yeah, for sure.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Second question. You're talking about playwrights. Are either of you guys familiar with Martin McDonagh?
No.
So film-wise, his latest one was The Banshees of Inisherin.
Yeah, that's how I know him. That's
So, and previous to that, he had done In Bruges I think it was his first movie that he wrote and directed.
Same pair of guys.
Yeah, same guys.
Well, and let's not forget, he really started off in Harry Potter. That was his big break.
Is that right?
No, I'm kidding. the actor, the main actor.
Brendan Gleeson.
Brendan Gleeson.
Yeah. That's funny.
But I'm sure that Martin McDonagh had some connection there because Brendan Gleeson appeared in Bruges immediately afterwards.
He's an amazing writer. Check out The Pillow Man. It's probably my favorite play of all time. And I think that the New York, the original New York cast was Billy Crudup and Jeff Goldblum.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty bonkers.
Nice.
So have a look. Yeah.
One thing that as far as plays, Jason and I actually been talking about for years around Christmas, it'd be really fun to do a stage musical of Scrooged as like the alternative. I think that'd be a really fun stage play.
That movie is unbelievable. We just watched it again this Christmas, showed our 7-year-old for the first time, and that movie is unbelievable. It's so good.
And what did he think?
Oh, it's amazing.
He loved it. He thought it was great. It's got scary moments, because it's like 80s practical effects, like goofy, weird stuff. And he was a little scared at a couple of moments with the ghost of Christmas Future and stuff like that. But other than that, he thought it was hilarious. So
that's awesome.
Right. And talk about like I wanted to say the setting and like all of the what is that set design? Yeah. A way to create an environment and a feeling and a vibe, and then Bill Murray is just the icing on the cake.
Well, also the modernization of an adaptation, of like a story that's been told so many times.
So original. It made it original again. Yeah.
That was when I was in LA through a friend. I spent a lot of time with Karen McCullough Lutz.
Okay.
She wrote Legally Blonde, but her first big thing was 10 Things I Hate About You, where she was like, okay, in Clueless, they retold Emma. What do I want to retell? Taming of the Shrew.
That's right.
And and she also, and I'm like, yeah, that's brilliant. You take old stories and you adapt them and make them modern, and all of a sudden it's like you see a whole different side to things.
Right. And really just a great way to capture Heath Ledger's evolution. Because he was entertaining in that film, but where he went before his death was just amazing.
Yeah.
So and I do like those modern film adaptations of Shakespeare. That's just fun. You don't have to leave the Bard alone. You can kind of nurture what you want out of that and make it something that a modern audience would really enjoy.
I'm not gonna lie, like definitely Leo as Romeo and that version of Romeo and Juliet. It's pretty compelling. He was pretty cool. He was pretty cool when that happened.
That was just really, again, one of those films that is just a joy to look at.
Yes,
that was beautiful.
Aesthetically, very
pleasing.
Yeah. How did you feel about the new Elvis movie? Speaking of Lerman,
I do like that director, and
Baz.
Yeah.
I don't know if I wasn't in the mood.
Right.
I maybe sat down on the wrong night, but I ended up watching it not all the way through. Like I did it like 2 separate days. I kind of want to start over and try again.
Yeah.
Because the actor that embodied Elvis you couldn't take your eyes off that guy. It was just, maybe I wasn't ready for kind of that director has so much frenetic energy. Moulin Rouge.
Right.
I mean, I think I just was cranky. But I think I love that the story was told in that way. I love that we now know how influential and how very negative the Colonel was on Elvis's life. And how Elvis thought he owed the public his essence. He gave too much.
Yeah.
I also think, as you said, it's really interesting telling it from the Colonel's point of view and showing that thing that like a villain does not think they're a villain, which I think is absolutely brilliant.
A narcissist does not think they're a narcissist. And what about Tom Hanks, the most unattractive? You never have sympathy for him. I've never seen him play a role like that.
But that main character, the guy who plays Elvis, was the guy who played Tex in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Right. Austin Butler.
The guy who's,
that's right.
Who Brad Pitt's like, wait, what was your name again? Rex, sir. I am the devil, here to do the devil's business. Nah, it's dumber than that.
Which, to circle back, I think it's one and the same for me. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think is his best and my favorite. He could call Kill Bill 2 movies and make that his 10th and just ride off into the sunset. I think
I really do like
it's
Kill
a
Bill
masterpiece.
too. I love Uma Thurman with a samurai sword, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the thing is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is like that really becomes similar to, I think that's number 2 in both categories for me. And I recently last year wrote an article comparing the movie to, he wrote a novelization.
The book,
and comparing that and going back and forth and the similarities and whatever. And the book was brilliant. I mean, the funny thing is he's going to stop making movies, but now he wants to start writing literature and doing all that stuff. And I mean,
yes,
I guess,
please.
Like I think that's going to be real, but the novelization was great. And if you ever listen to him in, the 10 million film podcasts that he's put out there, I've heard him talking about how just like his level of film geekitude is amazing, even to the point where he knows like his favorite movie novelizations, like not just his favorite movies, but like these are my favorite novelizations of said movies and how they're different.
He is a geek.
Oh
hardcore,
encyclopedic, like, but in like the coolest way. I mean, I try so hard to be that, and then I'm like, I can't keep up.
There's a clip of him on Kimmel. Kimmel reads the back of 80s VHS tapes and has Tarantino guess the movie, and he's right like 8 out of 10 times. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
His brain. What a computer. Unbelievable.
Well, what a joy. Thank you so much for joining us.
This was so fun. Thanks, Ryan.
It's been awesome. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Advanced Pretend is a podcast produced by 9 Stories Creative Podcast Studios, created by Jenn Ryan, executive produced and edited by Matt Jackson. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.